When I got my results back,
Yeah.
I was shattered because it was a 10 out of 15.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We all know English is one of the hardest subjects to get right, and it can be very tricky, especially after screwing up your first assessment. So today we're visiting the campus of Concept English Solutions, and I have my friend Chloe here to share her story on how she went from a below average student in year 12 to state ranking in her HSC English exams. So Chloe, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Hi guys, so I'm Chloe and I'm the founder of Concept English Solutions, and I state ranked 16th in 2018 when I graduated and did the HSC, and also scored a 49 out of 50 for English Extension 1. And so ever since then I've taught over 100 students, and I've seen time and time again exactly what it takes to get those top marks in English Advanced.
So what was like your actual journey throughout English for the HSC?
So my story is a little bit interesting because I actually seriously messed up my first English exam. And so throughout all of year 11, I was a pretty average kind of student, so nothing amazing. But I knew that English was one of the most important subjects of the HSC because it was compulsory. And because of that, you have to make sure you do really well in your ranking. And so given that, I made sure to study super hard for my first assessment. I actually started my English draft in the holidays before year 12 began, and I had about 6 drafts of my creative assessment, and it was worth 25%, so I knew it was a bit hefty. When I got my results back, I was shattered because it was a 10 out of 15. Yeah, and so with that, my ranking after the first assessment was actually over 100. So it was, obviously I was still above average, but it just was quite a hit to my ranking, obviously my morale as well, because I had tried so hard for that first assessment. And from that, I actually thought there'd be no way I'd be able to recover. But I knew that if I was going to get the ATAR that I wanted in the end, then I had to put this first assessment behind me and try really, really freaking hard for the rest of my assessments. And if that meant that I would be trying to aim for full marks in all of them, then I was going to do whatever it took to get that. It first started with the determination and the mindset. And I told myself that I was going to recover and that I wasn't going to let this first assessment affect me. And so after I made that resolution, I basically took all the steps necessary in order to make sure that I aced my next 4 exams. I kind of thought to myself, okay, there's 4 more left to go. I should just focus on that rather than get too caught up with my old assessments. And I think that was absolutely crucial in making sure that I was able to actually bring my rank back up, because so much of actual English and exams is all about like your mentality going into that exam room.
So like after that, how did you actually improve from that first 10 out of 15 and get the better results that you were looking for?
Yeah, so I knew that the upcoming 3 exams would all be mostly like essay focused. I knew that as long as I found the type of essay writing that would appeal to my school's English department the best, then it was almost guaranteed that I was going to do well. And so with that, I would say the key is to really start writing your drafts early so that you can start handing them in. And pretty much for every single assessment since that first one, I had minimum 5 drafts that I would pretty much just hand in and harass my teachers with every single time. And basically the way that I determined that my essay was ready was when I had no criticisms on my final draft. So we all know that at school, the type of feedback that you get isn't very extensive. They either pretty much just underline it, or they have a question mark, or they tick it. And so I knew that, okay, if I have an underline, I have to rewrite that sentence. And then if I get a tick, that means it's good. So I would just pretty much keep redrafting my essay up until every single line was pretty much a tick, or there'd be not much feedback. And that's because with your internal assessments, it's all about appealing to your school's English department. And so when you know that, then when you hand in your work, you're really aiming to just have no real criticisms from the school's English department. So I would actually say the key takeaway is to really just start your drafts early and keep reworking them. So don't actually wait until even 2 weeks before your assessment to start getting that final draft in. Try to get it done as early as possible, because then you can really get that feedback so you know exactly what you should be changing. So ever since that first assessment, I was actually able to get full marks in everything up until trials, where I lost 2 marks. And so in total, over like my whole HSC journey,
Yeah.
I lost 7 marks in total for my internals, and 5 was from my original first
So you only
assessment.
lost 2 marks for the rest.
Yeah,
Wow,
for the rest of the 12.
So like, what was the kind of essay framework that you finally realized was the best to use after all your experience writing those English drafts and like perfecting your essay?
Yeah, so after I was able to hand in all of those essays, I started to see that there was almost like a systematic framework or approach that they were looking for when it came to like what the HSC markers want in your essay. I would say there is some way to actually figure out the exact type of structure, the exact type of style that your English teachers are looking for. Again, emphasis on getting feedback. But I'll actually share with you guys today the scaffold that I ended up creating after writing all of those drafts. And I started to see there was like almost a pattern with what the teachers were looking for when it came to the style of writing, the structure, and just the way in general that you argue your essay. So one really key tip that I learned was that you really want to try make your writing as succinct as possible. And the reason for that is because you want to pack in as much analysis as you can. So this meant that as like a general rule of thumb, for a 3-paragraph essay, I would have minimum 5 quotes throughout it. So coming in from junior level English, you often are told to write in this structure called pedal or teal. And with that, you end up taking multiple sentences to get one piece of analysis across.
Yeah.
So I found this was very inefficient, and what I actually realized was that there was an alternate structure, which is in the scaffold, that you can use to get a lot more analysis in your paragraphs and thus have a greater chance of getting more marks just because you have greater depth and breadth of analysis.
Yeah. So like approaching an actual exam, like before, just those few days before, what were like your key steps that you took to like try to maximize the result during that actual exam?
Yeah, so I was actually never one of those people who were naturally really talented at English. So I sort of looked at a bunch of my friends who were able to write really well on the spot, but I knew that for me personally, I couldn't do that. And so I actually took the pre-memorization approach where I would memorize the perfect generic essays, but also a few paragraphs on top of that I would switch out in the exam. So in total, for my module B essay, so module B is like the most specific module when it comes to the type of questions they can ask you. In total, I had about 8 to 9 paragraphs.
Wow. And how many
For
words
that.
was that like you had to memorize?
Oh, it was close to around 2,000 words. But this is just the type of preparation that's really necessary for you to be like absolutely prepared. So if you know that you're not the type of person who's really good at thinking on the spot, then I would really, really recommend memorizing at the minimum additional quotes or additional pieces of analysis, and ideally different paragraphs that you'd slot into the actual exam.
Yeah.
So I actually really credit my success in the HSC to this approach, because on the day of my actual HSC exam for the final HSC in 2018, I actually ended up writing a completely new essay to the one that I used in my actual generic essay originally.
Yeah.
And I think that actually really differentiated me as a student from all of the other people who were writing like a generic kind of scaffold. And so when it comes to module B especially, you really want to differentiate yourself in your personal interpretation of the text. And so this is a really good approach for you in the exam when you're able to just like on the spot engage with the question best, just because you are prepared for all different types of questions.
So of course like that works for essays and analytical kind of questions. What about like for creative writing and reading tasks? Like, do you have any general tips or information for that?
Yeah, 100%. So when it comes to creative writing tasks, that first assessment was honestly my biggest lesson when it comes to writing something that the markers will actually understand and like.
Yeah.
So the problem was with my first assessment, it was a creative task and I tried way too hard to be super deep with it. So I actually made my entire creative a metaphor. And I would highly recommend against that. So you got to put your mind in the shoes of the marker who are reading multiple creatives one after another, and they're not really going to give you the time to actually try figure out what exactly the symbolism is. So I would say the biggest tip for creative writing is try to have a bunch of symbolism and try to make your creative have some type of moral message, but at the same time, don't try to make it like super deep, or don't try to pretend like you're Virginia Woolf or something, because the markers know that you're a high school student and they're not going to assume that you're some like amazing like literary writer or something. So I would say try to have a really solid moral message in your creatives, but at the same time make sure that that's super clear for the marker, and don't try to mask all of that in some like overarching metaphor or something that's really difficult to actually decipher unless you put in the time to figure it out.
But then like what happens when in the actual exam your creative writing is not suitable for the question that they might ask you in the actual exam?
Yeah, so I'm actually a huge believer that some creatives are actually a lot more adaptable than others. And so what you actually have to do with your pre-memorized creative is you have to make sure it's adaptable by having multiple different layers to it. So you don't just explore one idea, but you explore multiple different ideas. And so I really like to go through this checklist with my students. So when it comes to having different layers to your creative, I would recommend including at least 2 out of 3 of these different checklist points. 1, I would recommend having some type of social critique within your creative. So it doesn't have to be something really extreme like some political or some social type of critique, but like for example, your persona could be upset at the way the commercialization of literature nowadays pressures a lot of writers to write something that's more favorable to what will sell as opposed to something that's authentic to themselves. So it doesn't have to be something hugely critical, but it can just be some type of subtle critique that's embedded within your plotline. Secondly, HSC markers and a lot of school teachers as well love the theme of culture. So really try to integrate some type of cultural element throughout the entire story, mainly because it just gives an extra layer of depth to your story. And teachers really love it when it looks like you've done your research. So try to integrate a lot of cultural elements in the details throughout that creative. And so lastly, what I would also recommend is exploring the coming of age experience. And so have your character undergo some type of maturation throughout the creative. And the reason why this is so good is because the coming of age experience is something that all people can relate to, especially the markers. You want to actually write something that the markers feel like they themselves understand. And in doing so, they're more likely to connect with your creative and mark you higher. So when I talk about coming of age experience, I'm talking about some type of realization that has to happen in your creative that is reflective of your character undergoing like maturation. So if you include at least 2 out of 3 of these elements, notice how that gives your creative a lot more depth to it. And so if you have all these different elements in your creative, then you're much more likely to adapt to a stimulus on the day, just because there's a higher chance that you would have already engaged with an idea within the stimulus.
So of course, like you have a lot of tutoring experience and experience yourself. Like, what are the biggest common mistakes that you see yourself make and other students commonly make as well in English?
Yeah, so with a lot of my students, a lot of them don't feel super comfortable with writing on the spot either. So they were in the same situation that I was, where I wasn't super confident. But what they do is they prepare their essays way too late. Because when it comes to having a pre-memorized essay, you've got to make yourself really, really good at actually adapting it. Because otherwise, this is like the biggest thing that all HSC markers say, which is that, oh, you go into the exam, there's a question, but the students just regurgitate something that they've pre-memorized, right? It's like the kind of biggest thing that's told by all these teachers in HSC. So that's why it's actually really important to give yourself the time to practice adapting your pre-memorized essay. So as a general rule of thumb, I would say leave at least a minimum of 1 week to actually adapt your essay after you've got your final generic essay draft already. So I think just sort of the key takeaway from this mistake is really just like the lack of preparation and planning for your assessment. So what I see a lot of students do is they only start writing their essay once they get that English notification, which is 2 weeks before the actual exam. And at that stage, you should really already have a draft that's ready. And I would say you want to give yourself that last week to actually perfect that draft before you're focusing fully on really memorizing, consolidating your argument, and then adapting to different types of questions and making sure that you're going to be really quick on your feet during the exam and that you're not going to be taken aback by any surprise question that you haven't actually prepared for just because you've already exposed yourself to so many different questions. So here at Concept, we make sure to really give these students a kind of schedule for them to follow. So we actually try to plan for you to get your essay done 2 weeks before the actual exam. And then up until that exam, it's just practice after practice. So we go through these practice questions and we break down samples to them and how exactly to approach that question so that when you get to the exam day, there is almost nothing that can really throw you off because you've already exposed yourself to the different types of questions. So pretty much the way we hold our courses from start to finish is the first few weeks are really focused on conceptual understanding. So once you have that foundation, you know that when you get to the exam, you truly understand your text. So after we build that really strong conceptual foundation, we then move on to more of those analytical skills and essay writing in terms of the structure, how to get that 20 out of 20 or band 6. And then after that, it's fully just practice. So this is the kind of structure that I've seen work for me and for my students time and time again. Sometimes it only really takes a few small changes to actually really elevate your marks. So what I really love seeing is these students get these results that they didn't even know that they themselves could achieve just because they were doing maybe 1 or 2 things wrong the whole of their high school career.
And yeah, so did you have any other final comments you wanted to say?
Final comments would be to like and subscribe and comment to get that essay scaffold if you guys want to see what I did. Yeah, so I want all of you guys to do well in English as well. So make sure to comment so you can get my essay scaffold.
So hopefully you guys learned something useful from this video and can apply some of these tips to your own English study routines. As mentioned, there's the essay scaffold as a free resource, so make sure you follow the instructions on how to get it down in the comments down below. And if you found what Chloe said today useful, then make sure to check out Concept English Solutions, which is located in Town Hall, down in the description below. As always, take care, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.
Bye. Did I say bye?
No, I just like say goodbye.